Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 875. I start off with d4 here. My opponent went knight f6, I go c4, and he goes e6. So as usual setup for going into a Nimzo Indian, and I play knight c3 to allow the Nimzo. But then he doesn't play it. The Nimzo, of course, would be bishop to b4. It's funny that Lichess called this position the Nimzo Indian. It doesn't have a name, so that's why it's a queen's pawn opening. I thought it might be an old Indian, but I looked it up later, and the old Indian has the move d6 there instead of e6. So it was not an old Indian. It really is just a nameless opening. Anyway, it's a pretty quiet system here, and well, at least according to the chess engine, white can get a pretty big advantage. Although notice that right here, if Black were to play d5, this transposes into a perfectly ordinary queen's gambit declined. But Black continues to play this way, and maybe this is really a queen's Indian defense at this point. But we can see this position is not in the opening book, although we transpose back into an opening book position after a couple of moves. Yeah, bishop d3, although it's only one game, but all these moves are pretty reasonable. And then right here is where we really leave the opening book. And d5 is the main move here. And I suspected that it was. I just realized that after d5, he will probably play e5. At least that's the, you can see that's the line in the book. Even though his bishops have been squashed, it seems, and Black has a big advantage. White has a big advantage in space. But it's a really closed position, so it would take a lot of maneuvering for White to come up with a way to break through. And it's interesting, the opening book suggestion is knight to e1. I guess this allows for the immediate break with f4, so it makes some sense. Anyway, I wasn't looking forward to playing that kind of closed position, so I just, instead of d5, went rook e1 here. And I thought if he took, this would be a lot like a Meraxi bind kind of position against the Sicilian. And it has a lot of similarities to that, so I thought it's okay. And I think it is. It's just that the other line, well, at least theoretically, gives me a bigger advantage. Anyway, he went ahead and castled here. Went h3. I want to play bishop f4 and drop my bishop back to h2 if he chases it with his knight. He went queen c7. And I actually could play bishop f4 right here. I was wondering about this during the game. I kind of noticed this after I had played another move instead of bishop f4. There is the fork, but the knight can go to b5, hitting the queen, and then the bishop can reposition itself. And there's a decent position for White. There's this backwards pawn to put pressure on, so that would just be fine. Let's see, instead I played knight c2, getting out of the way of any forks. But as we saw, I didn't really need to do that. And this knight c2 move, well, it has the idea of rerouting the knight around, and it also gets the knight off of that square, which sometimes comes under fire from a bishop. In Meraxi bind positions, the bishop is often on this diagonal. Not in this game, so it wasn't really necessary to move that piece. So a bit of a wasted move there. And by this point, Black is really just fine here, so we're pretty much even or within shouting distance of even. So he played knight to c5. Went b3. I wasn't particularly worried if he takes my bishop, and in fact, this taking the bishop is a slight mistake. It's this knight here is a pretty good piece, sitting there and looking at a bunch of squares, including the e4 square. And if I try to chase it, it can always sacrifice or trade itself off for the bishop. Then no need to take it right away. The chess engine would just keep developing with rook a to c8. Anyway, he took right away. This maybe gives me a little bit of something. He goes rook f to d8, wants to make sure this pawn stays defended. I went knight e3. Yeah, sometimes there are tricks. If you can get a rook on the c file and you can drop this knight into the d5 square, even though it gets taken by a pawn, you take back with a tempo on the queen. Sometimes that gives you sufficient counterplay, or if there's pieces sitting here or here, it can just win material back. But I don't think that tactic is happening in this game. Let's see, he went knight d7 here. Also looking at these dark squares. It's a good move. Let's see, I went knight b5, hitting his queen, and planning to pick up the pawn, but it seems I can't actually win the pawn, even though I do grab it here. It seems that with best play, black always gets the pawn back. And in fact, he took here, and the chess engine would give the pawn back immediately. It's take with the queen, let him grab the e-pawn with the bishop. That's why I didn't want to take with the queen. It left the e-pawn hanging. And then just defend the queen with the rook. And then he would drop back. And white's a little bit better in this position, I guess, because the pieces are a little more active. This knight, for the moment at least, is pinned. Yeah, so he needs to come back and defend his rooks before he can move that knight. So maybe it's a slightly awkward position for black, a slight edge to white. Anyway, that's best play. Actually, knight takes d6 is a mistake according to the chess engine, and well, we'll show what he should have done. I kind of saw this idea, knight e5. I mentioned this during the game. He can attack my queen, but I can take a bishop attacking his queen. He takes my queen, I take his queen, and then I just wasn't calculating ahead far enough. He can take my rook. So he ends up the exchange. There's no way to save this. Let's see, if I take the knight right away, he takes my knight, and he's just up the exchange. And try to get a little more by grabbing a pawn here, but he just takes back. He's up the exchange, and I have two extra pawns, one here and one here. But he can activate his rooks, and it's a good position for white. The other way to play it is to play knight b7, trying to move the knight with an attack on the rook. And let's see, well, black gives up the knight this way is the most effective way of giving up that knight. And then he just attacks my knight, and my knight is trapped. So I'm still not managing to escape with any extra material. Let's see, f4, rook takes b7, and king f1 is the engine line, and it says black is pretty much just up the exchange. So all that is good for black. So that was his chance to really get an edge in this game. Let's see, instead, after I took the knight, he just played bishop c6, got his bishop out of the way. And then now I have to worry about how I'm going to defend this knight. I didn't want to move it right away. The chess engine would just play rook a to d1. And that seems to be fine. There's kind of a neat little tactic here where if he goes knight f6 to try and exploit the pin, I can actually push the e-pawn forward right away. I don't have to worry about the queen taking the pawn. You might want to see if you can figure out the tactic there. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. If you want time to think about it, go ahead and pause the video. But if he grabs that pawn, the trick is to play the move knight to d5. So the rook is hitting the queen. Queen needs to move again, and then this knight can hop into e7. And that's a fork. It hits the king, and it hits the loose bishop over here. So he has to move his king, and then I grab the bishop. And that's all good for white. So so that's the best way to hold on to things here. After knight takes bishop c6, I should just bring my rook over, defend with the queen and rook. Instead I played f4 with the intent of playing e5, and he went knight f6. He could have tried e5 himself. This still works out okay. I have to unpin my knight, give up a pawn here, and then I can play here and hold on to my knight this way. And you'll see that once again the material count is even. So it seems like with best play in every line, he always manages to get that pawn back. So anyway, let's go back to the game. I went knight d6, he went bishop c6, I went f4, and he went he went knight f6 here. So that allows me to protect my knight. But then he went knight here, so he's attacking my knight while it's pinned. The chess engine actually likes knight h5 there, hitting the f-pawn. Another interesting way to play. So I bring my rook over, trying to hold on to things. He takes, I take back, and then he plays rook d7. He's just going to double here, and there's no really convenient way for me to hold on to that pawn. I have to unpin the knight. So king h1. I was going to push this pawn forward, and when he takes, take back with the knight, try and hold on to it that way. although he can kick the knight away, so that might not have worked. Anyway, he played actively here with rook a d8. I just wanted to mention that Chess Engine would actually unpin with queen to d4, offering the trade there, and maybe that's a little better for white. Anyway, I went king h1, rook a d8, just got my queen out of the way because I didn't want to end up having to exchange off everything on the back rank here. So this limits the exchanges to just one pair of rooks, and so that keeps enough force on the board to make the game interesting and complicated. So that's why I went with this approach. I could have played b4 here. The Chess Engine likes that, but I decided I liked this knight g4 better. Chess Engine prefers the b4 move actually there. He went queen h5, which is still okay, although we're getting near the critical mistake. Best here was h5, kicking my knight. The knight would probably go here, and then the bishop would drop back so it doesn't get traded off. The Chess Engine likes black in this position. Well, this is a nice piece looking across the whole board, and it has a target. So, at some point I'm probably going to play king h2 to unpin things over here. And he has an extra pawn on the king side. I have an extra pawn on the queen side. I mean, the material is even, so any advantage that black may have is just based on better pieces and better activity. I still would be happy to play this position as white, so I'm not too worried about that, but Chess Engine does prefer black there. Anyway, he went queen h5, and I played queen g3, setting up this little tactic with knight to f6, and then he made the pretty terrible blunder rook to d3. I think what he was thinking here, if you're curious, is that if he could distract the queen, then he could play queen takes h3 because of the pin. It's not defended, and then he could take on g2 and mate me. So he's probably thinking that I can't take the rook because it's mate. But of course, if I take the rook, the rook queen is still defending on h3. So that was just nonsense. Just a slip. Just a real slip there. And also it didn't do anything about the other threat. And I went ahead and played this way because I noticed that after let's see, he went king f8. After I take the queen, my knight is actually defending my queen. So it's not a trade. I'm just a rook up. And at this point, he resigned. Anyway, it was a pretty interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.